We're live.
Good morning, Summa scholars. Welcome to the Daily Summa. Today is Friday, February 21st, the 6th week in Ordinary Time. And it's also some saint's memorial that I can't remember. Isn't that exciting? Joe?
Yeah, totally, dude.
Yesterday was Jacinta, I think is her name. She was one of the visionaries from Fatima.
Hold on, it's Saint Peter Damian.
That's it. You are
Mhm.
correct. Yeah, he was poor and then he became a priest and he taught people to do a lot of stuff. And then now he's a doctor of the church. Yeah, it's good stuff. How goes it, Joe? Can you tell us anything? Can you tell the good people out there in Streamland anything going on new at your life?
My parents are in town, so that's cool. Getting to see
Nice.
them, getting to see them, to see the kids. Gonna try to bring my parents down to Chesterton's
Good.
over the probably tonight.
They've never been there before?
My dad had stopped by once, but it was a really small crowd. There's one other guy there, so I'm hoping to get them to meet some more people this time and show them the speakeasy and all that.
Oh, yeah. The Dumb Oxes Club.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If people don't know, St. Thomas Aquinas was nicknamed the Dumb Ox by his fellow students, who I guess he was soft spoken. They didn't realize how smart he was, so they called him the Dumb Ox. Yep. So has your mother given any gems of dark humor yet?
Hmm. I don't know. Last night we talked a lot about work.
That's
Oh.
just dark in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just like not like specific work, but like the concept of work and what it should be and whatever.
Mm, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Last night at the dinner party I went to with the nuns, um, there was a priest there. There were a couple guests, and then there was like, of course, Maddie, and Rose, who's the two women who are discerning whether they want to be nuns, and
Mm-hmm.
then a priest, and there was guests, and anyway, the conversation with the priest ended up talking about rest. So you guys talked about work, and we talked about rest and sleep.
Interesting.
Yeah, he talked about how the, many of the saints exhausted themselves,
Mm-hmm.
staying up all night, going John Vianney, I think, in the confessional all day, not eating a lot. And then my question did they become saints because of that or in spite of that?
Probably a really important question. That's something I have also wondered.
Probably a really important question. And then, of course, I brought up the famous quote from St. Francis of Assisi at the end of his life that he regretted that he had been too harsh on Brother Ass. Brother Ass is what he called his body. Brother
Mm-hmm.
Donkey. Brother Donkey. He had been too hard on Brother Donkey. Um, yeah. And then I said, well, there's a point at the end when the person comes to such a point of prayer that their full desire is in the next world, that they're really living for the next world. They're essentially already dead. What did St. Paul said? The life I live, but I do not live. I am dead. Christ lives in me.
Mm.
That sort of thing. Then perhaps at that moment, a push towards exiting is conceivable, you know? But, the problem is people, it's the nature of humans that everybody wants to believe that they're at a higher level than they are at whatever you're doing, not just spirituality, anything. It's like the people that are on those shows that used to be popular. Maybe they still are. I don't know. I haven't watched it in years. But like um, American Idol or whatever.
Mm.
The shows where the first ones where they have all the contestants coming in, and these people think they know how to sing, and they just don't.
Right, and then
And then
nobody's. Yeah, it's always weird because they always come in like, my friends love the way I sing. And then they come in and just like, dude, your friends hate you.
Yeah, it can't be true. It just cannot be true. You have friends that don't tell you when you got a booger in your nose or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's your friends. But yeah, we all want to think that we're more advanced than we are. My buddy Hank Shima of the Pecos Hank Storm Chasing YouTube channel often talk about that dynamic. That what is it that we don't see about ourselves? You know what I mean? Like there's got to be something.
Right.
Clearly,
I mean, we all
there's got
got
to be.
something. Yeah.
We've all got something where everybody else is sitting around going, he doesn't realize that this thing is how it is with him.
Mm.
Yeah. You have to kind of be aware of that, I think. So this dinner with the nuns, I told you there were guests. And so I won't say who said it, but I brought up the learning that I received from Gomorrah that I told the folks at Chesterton's about. In Sanhedrin, in Masechta Sanhedrin, it says the rubrics for a death sentence case, and that they have to announce it 40 days prior publicly, that there's going to be a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
I don't know if we ever talked about that
We
specific
might
40
not
day
have.
thing.
I know that Kevin was there because he was deeply
Yeah.
affected by what I'm about to say. And maybe Asian was there. But anyway, it was kind of mind-blowing. So in this Masechta, it's telling the traditions of Sanhedrin and how the Sanhedrin was run. They say that 40 days before death sentence, they have to announce it publicly. And then, now my guess is this is a mercy because there's all these mercies that are in place in the oral law to help, so you don't have to actually kill someone.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of mercies that are given. So it's almost like, I remember hearing one of the rabbis that said, if there is one death in a year, that is an unmerciful Sanhedrin. Now, I wish I could remember what rabbi said that and where that came from, and if that was Hazal or if that was a modern rabbi, but I think it was an ancient rabbi. But the point is, the thing is set up almost that nobody actually gets killed. But the reason that's done that way is, and I don't want to get into that whole teaching, that's a nighttime teaching. But the reason it's done that way is because God is trying to show the severity of these sins. If he did not explain to you what that does to your soul in some physical way that you can understand, like stoning or having your head chopped off or hanging, then you wouldn't understand that there was a severity involved here. So God sets up the law. Here's what you do. You stone someone for this. You stone someone for breaking Sabbath. And then the oral law sets up all these ways in which you're actually getting everyone out of these deaths so you don't have to actually kill someone. And it's set up there as a balance to, that's the only way that we can have a cognitive change, that someone who is from a culture that was bowing down to sticks and stones and throwing their children into the fire of Melech or whatever, the Baal, how depraved humanity was in the past, to get them to a place of, how can you even get them to the place to think that that writing a letter on the Sabbath is evil? Like how do you get someone who's murdering people? Anyway, so you have to have some kind of law that says here's the severity of it, but then God in his mercy through the oral law is actually getting everyone out of it so you don't have to kill them, but there still has to be this jeopardy there. Anyway, I'm talking to the people about this law in the oral law in the Gomorrah that 40 days prior to a death sentence you have to announce it publicly. My assumption is this lets the person know that there's a possible death sentence coming, and they can either go to a city of refuge or they can get out of town, or whatever. There's means if they want to, or they can get their case together. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
remember us talking about the case itself and stuff, and about how, like, wasn't there something where if you're like a witness to a capital punishment thing, you also have some kind of skin in the game?
yeah, that was also the other mercies to try to make sure an actual death sentence never takes place. One is that the two witnesses have to be the person that kills them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're going to witness to someone that they've broken the Sabbath, let's say, or some other thing, they've committed adultery, you have to be the one to actually kill them. And then the other thing is, if the person's going up to be stoned and they say, I have reason to believe that I'm innocent, they have to stop the stoning, bring them back to the Sanhedrin, start a whole new court case. They get a reprieve, and then they have to go and do another case, and then they can do it a second time. They can be going to the place to be stoned, and then they say, I have reason to believe I'm innocent, and then they have to go back and do a whole other case, call the Sanhedrin in again. It's a big kerfuffle.
Hmm.
So all this is in place to try to make it to where it doesn't actually happen. They get all these chances to get off. And we have that in our court system too, because all of it comes from Gomorrah and Talmud and Mount Sinai, ultimately. I know people disagree with that, but whatever. So anyway, the main thing I'm wanting to get at is this 40-day prior announcement. As I'm watching the rabbi, he says, now you'll notice that this cuts off in the Gomorrah and just it abruptly ends. Something was taken out of the Gomorrah right here at this point, where after it talks about the 40-day public announcement that someone's has a death sentence. He says the reason why that was taken out is because the persecutions of the Catholic Church were such that they didn't want anything in there that might get them in trouble with the church. And he says, but I know where it is, this thing that was taken out. And so he brings out another book that has the stuff that was taken out of the Gomorrah. And he begins to read it in Aramaic. And he says, now I have to be very quiet, because at the time he was traveling. So he was at a hotel. And he was like, I have to be very careful of who's listening. So I'm going to read this in in Aramaic, and I'm going to use veiled language. But what he said, because I can somewhat understand what he's saying, what he said is essentially, this is what we did. The 40-day prior to death sentence public announcement is what we did with Yeshua le Nazarite. Yeshua le Nazarite, Jesus the Nazarene.
Oh my!
And
Wow.
shocking, yeah?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the Gomorrah is testifying to, first of all, the existence of Christ for these goofy people who don't think Jesus lived. Um, Maybe you don't know if you're watching, but that's kind of a closed case. There are no historians who don't believe Jesus lived. In fact, even atheists, they believe that even that the apostles thought that he resurrected from the dead. They don't believe he resurrected from the dead. Or if he did, that some weird thing happened they can't explain, but it's not normal and it doesn't have to do with God or anything or whatever. They have a lot of different explanations, but historians don't believe that he didn't exist. That's just something that, like, internet meme people believe. But anyway, this is another testimony to his existence and his also it shines light on how the apostles knew that he shouldn't go to Jerusalem. It's very strange. Why are they going, you can't go? Why were they worried? And how did he know? I mean, obviously you can say he knew because of prophecy and the Holy Spirit and everything, but he says what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem. This lends a further explanation or fleshing out or whatever of why the apostles knew that something bad was going to be happening, because there had already been a public decree it would have spread like wildfire. People would have heard, they would have told disciples, they would have run and told Jesus and the apostles, hey, they made a public decree about the master. So they would have known that something was going to be happening in Jerusalem 40 days prior, having to do with the death sentence.
Wow.
But the thing I want to talk about is when I said that last night at the party, one of the people there said, how do you know it's true? And I wasn't expecting that from this group. And it was like a kick to the stomach, kind of. Because, and then this person said, I'm just asking the questions I've been trained to ask. You need sources. And so I kind of just gave up at that point. I said something about how baked into the oral tradition is machoiches and disagreements and arguments about what rabbi heard what properly, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that was hard for me was that I had a sudden realization. First of all, the Gemara is a source.
Right.
I mean, why are we... It's like when the skeptics want to not accept the Gospels as a source.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. Yeah.
It is a source. It's a historical source. And to have someone say, where's the source? From this source I just gave, it's almost like doubting the Jews. I mean, I know that's harsh, and I'm not saying that's what this person was doing, but, oh, it's Jewish tradition? Well, I'm going to need another source. Again, I'm not saying that that's what this person was saying, but the Gemara is a historical source. And second of all, it doesn't make sense that they would hide it. If it's not true, then they were putting it in there to say that they had mercy on Jesus. So they would want that in there. That's one way you could look at it. They would want it. They would not take it out and hide it. But you could argue that maybe they just don't want anything in there referencing him at all, in case the church goes crazy and says weird stuff, which of course all humans do that. So it's a legitimate concern. But the other difficult thing for me, Joe, was I realized I had asked them, you guys know what the Gemara is, right? And some of them shook their head no. The mountain that you would have to climb to convey over to someone what the Gemara is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I don't really know, but especially me, how much I've studied it, and I'm in it every day and I'm hearing it every day. But you've went through it with me for long enough to know that there's so much there. But if you tell it to someone, oh, it's Jewish tradition, that's just going to sound to them like, we wear yarmulkes, yada-dee-dee. We eat lox and bagels. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, how do you convey over to someone the fullness of Gemara and how it's intricately connected to the Gospels, the life of Jesus, and the Torah? And someone can just flippantly doubt it. Well, we don't listen to Jewish tradition. Yeah, of course not. We don't even listen to Torah, but you still don't discount the scriptures. I don't know. Again, I've just had a realization of even people right now watching this aren't even understanding what I'm getting at. It's too much. And so my only thought was like, come Lord Jesus. Like, there's too many knots to untangle in this world. It takes too long. Or trying to explain to someone about the Catholic Church when they say, y'all worship Mary. I mean, when someone says that, they're at such a level of not understanding. To get them back to an even place to start talking is such a laborious task.
Well, I was talking with somebody yesterday, Protestant guy, really good dude. And he had that kind of question. He went to a little thing where somebody spent most of the time talking about Mary, and he was like, "I think it seems like you're taking away from Jesus." And I'm like, "Yeah, you just don't understand." And that sounds flippant, but you just really don't understand what we're saying when we say that, like, and I really feel like it's one of those things. As I was leaving that conversation, I realized it's one of those things where if you haven't experienced building a relationship with a saint, you can't really understand what it is if you haven't been doing it already. Like, it takes that first moment of, okay, let's see how legit this is, and trying it to really understand, like, okay, no, that's real. That's a real thing. And that's really how it is. It really does point me to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You can't logic your way around
Yeah.
proving that. You just
And if
can't.
someone's already had a deep experience with Jesus, as many Protestants and evangelicals have,
Mm-hmm.
how do you say, no, you can have a super duper deeper?
Yeah, right.
Like,
It's like the pitch isn't. You
okay.
can't. It means
And
nothing.
then they would have to see you floating above the ground with light coming out of you. Like, because what they're going to say is, and I sympathize with it, is what I'm trying to say. You say, no, you can have a deeper relationship. And then they're going to look at you and go, you mean like you? You
Yeah,
know what I
right.
mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, you want me to be like you with with all your faults that I see? And I mean, they've got a point. What are you going to do? So the end thing is prayer. It's what we say, man. It's that thing you made a short of. It's falling in love. You can't logic someone into falling in love or something. These things are more when someone's already there. You shore up their belief with rational explanations, and that's helpful and useful. Or study can be such that you who already believe begin to see, and it opens up your eyes into greater depths of what you're seeing. But the study is not to logically convince someone of something. I just don't. Even if you do sit down and logically show someone, because that does happen. Even last night at the dinner party, they were talking about one of the nuns went and spoke at a college or something, and one of the students talked about how they had this conversion to the Catholic Church through
Mhm.
logic and reason. Somebody showed them and they changed. But even if that's true, it's sort of like that iceberg thing I was talking about, where you see it collapse and fall all of a sudden. But there's been a
Mhm.
lot of other stuff happening under the surface that you didn't see, and all those things have to do with prayer, sacrifice, and the work of the Spirit of God. It's just that's the only way it's going to work. Yeah. So it was just a bit frustrating last night because I realized I cannot convey over to this other person everything I know
Right.
at a little dinner party.
Hmm.
Can't happen. Speaking of not knowing or not seeing clearly or whatever, I'm going to read Ryan Budd's comment on yesterday's question about the word consist. I said, I wish Ryan were here to say what is the meaning of that word consist. Whether goodness consists in mode, species, and order. All right, here's what he says. He quotes the Latin quod non esset nisi ratio boni in iis consisteret, ergo ratio boni consistit in modo, specio, et ordine. This is Thomas's comment on what Augustine has just said. The sense in the context is that consist in means what makes the thing what it is. Hence why Augustine says those three things are what generate greater or lesser goodness. Already there's a problem, because what makes a thing what it is what we've said is substance. Consisto etymologically means stand up together. So what something consists in is what makes it stand up as opposed to fall down. It's what makes it itself. Again, that's how we use the word form. This is similar to the idea of substantia, substance, which etymologically means what stands underneath. So one consist is what makes it stand up, and the substance is what stands underneath. Now we have an interesting distinction. Substance would be like the ground of the thing, and then the consist would be like what's holding it up, like an armature. The entry at Wiktionary I don't find particularly helpful because the word consisto apparently has a wide lexical range. One has to be careful, and I can just hear Ryan Budd's voice in that. One has to be careful looking at dictionaries or lexicons when the word has a wide lexical range. Just because it can mean something in some context doesn't mean it can always mean that in every context. And then he gives the reference. But then he says, Charles in Short, which I'm guessing is a reference that I don't know about. Charles in Short suggests that consist in could also be said to mean depend upon. That makes good sense. Depend upon. So you would read that to say, does goodness depend upon mode, species, and order? That makes a little more sense to me in this sense. Remember that goodness can be seen or thought about in two ways. One, the goodness of God. And as he said, as Thomas said in one of the other articles, that goodness is the same as his being. He is good, and he is ipsum esse, pure being. His pure being is good. He is one. But in our minds, we make logical distinctions and we talk about being, and then we go over here and we talk about goodness. But in the ultimate reality of the deity, that is not two different things, that is one thing. Just like when I've said we talk about male and female, and these are images of the deity, but they're images that give us an intuition of what he is, which is one, not divided like that. These are ways our human mind comes to climb the mountain up towards the vision of the one. Okay, so our minds depend upon mode, species, and order to come to apprehend goodness. So it's from the human perspective. Again, we've often said you have to think of things from the divine perspective or the human perspective. And so now we're talking from the human's perspective. Goodness consists or depends upon mode, species, and order. That was yesterday's question. I want to also clarify the word mode because it seems that's difficult for people to understand. Think about it in this way. We use the word modify or modification. That you pretty much understand what that means. To modify something, or we've made a modification. To modify something can be the act of modifying it. It's in motion. It's in movement of modifying. We're changing. You're going to make a few modifications in this stream so that it flows better, right? Once you've made those modifications, now you can say it's modified. So it can be the word mode, as Thomas is using it, can be either part of a movement. Its mode is in movement and change, just like you're modifying the stream. Or mode can be already changed and in that state of being modified. Almost like the difference between a noun and a verb. Or we talk about music modulating. It's changing to another key. So mode is the movement or the thing that is already moved and how it is that way. Again, these terms will become more and more clear the more and more we study these things, and that's why we're doing that. So we're going to go ahead and move into Article 6, Question 5. The question is whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. Now, as we've said before, anytime you try to define the word good or use the word good, it's very difficult because it's a bedrock experience. It's a bedrock reality. So you're having to, usually when people want to describe what good means, define good, they have to use the word good to do it because it's an experience. If you tell someone who's blind, what does red look like? And you say, well, hot, it's like heat. Okay, but that's not really explaining to them what red is like. someone who's never had coffee. You can try to explain, well, it's bitter, but it's not bitter like a lemon. I don't know. It's hard to use words to describe experiences, and we experience goodness. Okay, let's start with question 1. And just for time's sake, I think I'm going to just zip through the objections, and then we'll get to the other explanation, and then we'll go to the reply, and it's a short page. Objection 1, Larry steps up on deck. Larry on deck at this beaver galleon. I was really hoping to talk to the nuns last night about the beaver galleon at the
Oh, you
dinner
didn't get to
party.
that.
It never came up.
Oh.
You know what else I noticed? This will be wonderful for the people who don't know me and are here to hear Thomas Aquinas, what I'm about to say.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this is a vetting thing. You're coming into a class with Craig Kinsey. I know you probably don't know what that means, and ooh, Craig Kinsey. But the point I'm getting at is it's a little Diogenes. We got Plato, we got Aristotle, and like I've said, you need a little shtickle picante of Diogenes in the mix. And so in my prior life, in my past, especially when I wasn't going to Mass, I got mad at God and stopped going to Mass for like 8 years, 10 years, whatever it was. I don't know. During that time, I made some very, very dear friends who are still very, very dear friends of mine, which are burlesque girls. I'll let that just sink in for a minute.
Yeah.
Burlesque girls, they take their clothing off in front of men for entertainment, or women too. It's really not, it's not like the word stripper is more of just the crass sexualization of the person's body. This is a sexualization of a person's body, but with artistry. With artistry and a storyline. So anyway, I was reflecting on how different it is to hang out with a bunch of nuns and to hang out with a bunch of burlesque girls. And yet, how similar it is also. You know? It turns out that women are very similar in certain ways. And it's very different in certain ways too. But always entertaining, always delightful. Always entertaining, always delightful, and always moving, reflective, interesting. So let's see what objection 1. Larry steps up on top. Oh, I didn't get to talk about the beaver galleon with them, and it's a very great disappointment because they kind of hogged the conversation. The nuns hogged the conversation last night, dude.
Those nuns, man.
I know. Like conversation hogs. And a great deal of laughter. There was a great deal of laughter. I was like, these nuns are not drunk as you suppose. I think that's the only word I got in edgewise at the dinner party last night. These nuns are not drunk as you suppose. They were just cracking up in tears. Okay. Again, monasteries, very joyful places. Objection 1. It seems that goodness is not rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant, for goodness is divided by the 10 predicaments. Seriously, Thomas? The 10 predicaments? Can you guess what that is, Joe?
It's another thing that we need to classify. It's another classification from like Aristotle or something.
Yada, yada, blah, 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 another thing.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's the annoying part. It's not another thing. It's another word for a thing we already have talked about.
Oh,
Why you got to throw other words in, man? It's like we need people are going to hate this, but it's a joke. We need Elon Musk to come in and clean this thing up and get out the extraneous words in here, man. Is there any? Can you remember what else we talked about that there's 10 of with Aristotle?
It's not the modes.
Right, it's not, but you're close. Now I'm blanking on it. Now I'm blanking on it. I had it in my head a few seconds. I know what it is. It's the 10. Oh my gosh. People who know this are really getting upset right now. I'm upset because the categories, the 10 categories. time, space, posture, substance. You remember all those? Something can't. It's the 10 categories. Aristotle's 10 categories. But all of a sudden now, for no reason, Larry is going to call it the 10 predicaments, which is also confusing because we use the word predicament to mean you're in a trouble, but he's using it, I'm assuming, with the root predicate, what something is predicated upon. So Larry is just adding confusion upon confusion upon confusion. He's just trying to get the heat off of him from the mask debacle.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to cause confusion on this galleon so that people fight over it and they don't come the heat on him for the chewing of the mast thing. Anyway, the 10 predicaments are the 10 categories of Aristotle. As the philosopher says, but the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant can be found under one category. Therefore, goodness is not rightly divided by them. I suppose a substance can be both virtuous, useful, and pleasant, or a posture can be good, useful, or pleasant. So one of the categories. You know what? I had this vague memory of Dr. Rebard talking about this once, but I can't remember what he said.
Man, we're on fire today.
Dude, we are firing in all cylinders today. Okay. Objection 2. Let's see what Ralph has to say. Further, every division is made by opposites, but these three do not seem to be opposites. For the virtuous is pleasing, and no wickedness is useful, whereas this ought to be the case if the division were made by opposites. For then the virtuous and the useful would be opposed, and therefore the division is incorrect. Ralph brings in wickedness, which has to do with evil, which Thomas has already said is a privation. He's not talking about privations. He's talking about being under the aspect of goodness. And so Ralph is bringing confusion. Now we have Shimon. Further, where one thing is on account of another, there is only one thing. But the useful is not goodness, except so far as it is pleasing and virtuous. Therefore, the useful ought not to be divided against the pleasant and the virtuous. Well, we're going to find out if the useful really is being divided against the pleasant and the virtuous. On the contrary, Ambrose makes use of this division of goodness. That's pretty simple and to the point. Thomas is like, well, Ambrose said it,
Mic drop.
Mic drop, yeah. Ambrose said it. That's why an argument from authority is the weakest kind. But still, that's the way the Summa works. We first do an argument from authority, and then now in the respondio, I answer that. Thomas is going to give the logical, rational reasons why goodness is divided into virtuous, useful, and pleasant. And here's where it gets hard. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. I answer that. This division properly concerns human goodness. Okay, so now he's saying we're not talking about the divine perspective. First of all, we're talking about the human perspective. But then he's going to bring a wrinkle into it. If we consider the nature of goodness from a higher and more universal point of view, we shall find that this division properly concerns goodness as such. So he's saying we're not talking about goodness as such. We're talking about goodness from the human perspective. But on the other hand, if you consider goodness from a higher universal point, it does work with goodness as such. Now, this is a little annoying, I know. We're not talking about God's goodness because there is no division. We're talking about goodness as such, but from a higher point of view, from our experience. So you can see how this can get Kabbalistic very quickly, how things move up into the higher realms, and then they get into Cater and Ein Sof, into realms that are difficult to talk about. That's kind of where we're going in this little rocket ship. This galleon is bursting off into the stars, into the stratosphere up here. For everything is good so far as it is desirable, and is a term of the movement of the appetite, the term of whose movement can be seen from a consideration of the movement of a natural body. Now we're going to talk about how things work in this natural, visible world. And when he says a body, he means like anything like a cup or a rock or an apple. Now, the movement of a natural body is terminated by the end absolutely. The telos is the end. The telos is its goal. That's why this is confusing, because the word end, we hear it, we think it means something stopped. But don't forget, this is telos, which means a goal. You're working towards a purpose, a goal. Now, the movement of a natural body is terminated or ends by the goal, absolutely, and relatively by means through which it comes to the end, where the movement ceases. So a thing is called a term of movement, so far as it terminates any part of that movement. That's so confusing. Think about it like this. We said that movement is not just two balls clicking on a table, but movement is motion as something moves towards its goal. And we use the example of the caterpillar moves into a chrysalis, and then from a chrysalis it moves into a butterfly. That's all in Thomas's language, movement. Even though that thing didn't go anywhere on the tree, didn't move to the other side of the tree, it's moving, it's changing. Thomas is saying that each little section, let's say each second of that change from caterpillar to butterfly, each second of that, if you're watching it on a video in slow-mo, each second ends, terminates. Each part of the movement terminates to make way for the next part of the movement as it moves towards its termination, meaning its goal. So let's take all the philosophy language out of it and just say that things change over time. And each second, that change, part of the change ends. And it's all moving towards a goal. Does that seem fairly simple, Joe? Things change over
I
time.
think, right. Yeah.
And
That's the thing.
the caterpillar phase stops at some point, and we move into a chrysalis phase. So the caterpillar part of that movement ends, and the chrysalis part begins, right? And then that chrysalis part ends, and the butterfly part begins. That whole caterpillar, weaving, chrysalis, fighting to get out of the chrysalis, its whole purpose, its goal, is to make a beautiful butterfly. So each part of a movement ends through time, but it's all leading towards a goal. Now, the ultimate term of movement can be taken in two ways, either as the thing itself towards which it tends, a place or a form, it tends towards a butterfly, or a state of rest in that thing, enjoyment of the butterfly. It's resting in its new life as a butterfly. Thus, in the movement of the appetite, your will, your desire, the thing desired that ends the movement of the appetite relatively as a means by which something tends towards another is called useful. The chrysalis is useful, but it's not the goal. The chrysalis is useful. You have to have the chrysalis to get the butterfly. So Thomas is saying, the whole thing is good, but we're going to say that the means by which we get to our goal, the chrysalis, is useful. We're going to call that useful. That which is sought after as the last thing absolutely terminating the movement of the appetite, as a thing towards which for its sake the appetite tends, we're going to call that virtuous. The thing is tending towards being a butterfly. The chrysalis is there by virtue or for virtue of the butterfly. That's what the chrysalis is serving. And it has to believe. Now I'm jumping terms, but we have to do this. We have to juggle terms in our mind to get an understanding of what's being said. The caterpillar has to believe in the butterfly, or else it's not going to make the chrysalis. Okay? It has to think that the butterfly reality is a virtue. But the problem, I don't want to tell you the problem yet. Let's keep going. For the virtuous is that which is desired for its own sake. The caterpillar desires this because the butterfly is just for its own sake. It just wants to be a butterfly. But that which terminates the movement of the appetite in the form of rest in the thing desired is called pleasant. Being the butterfly is pleasant. Mr. Caterpillar's now enjoying flying around from flower to flower, thing to thing. So now we have 3 ways of looking at what is good. We have 3 ways of looking at it. We say it's useful. The chrysalis is useful. The little branch on which the caterpillar crawls up to put its chrysalis connected to, that's useful. The weaving, the circular motion is useful. We're going to say that that's useful. That's part of goodness, that this is all useful. Next, we're going to say that butterfly in and of itself is a virtue. And then we're going to say being that butterfly and flying around and flapping is pleasant. It's enjoyable to fly around, as humans also like to do. So Thomas is wanting you to know that goodness is one thing, but in our minds, we can divide it up and say, we can look at it under the aspect of being virtuous, being useful, and being pleasant. Now, let's take a cup of coffee. In and of itself, the coffee's good. It's also useful. It's helping me stay awake. It's hydrating my body. And it's also pleasant. It's the pleasure that draws me to it. That's going to be very important. Remember when I often talk about the little breadcrumbs that God is leaving on the earth in this world that he's created of shadows and shattered vessels? He's leaving breadcrumbs to pull you to himself. It's a little game. It's a little escape room. It's a little breadcrumb puzzle. And each person gets to enjoy the fullness of the puzzle depending on how well they put it together on earth. Your eternity, your vision of God will be like a puzzle. If you just put a few pieces together, you'll still enjoy it. It'll still be, oh, look, there's a little dolphin. I can see a little dolphin, and then a bunch of void and emptiness. Oh, and there's a wave and a moon, but you didn't put the full thing together. The saints, being experts at virtue, put the whole thing together, and then they get to know it. They get to rub their hand across it and know it and experience it in all of its fullness, the divine vision. Of course, this puzzle should have bumpers. This escape room and game should have bumpers. Seems to me. But now, there's a lot going on here. God is good. It's difficult to just say that. You can't just say that and just jump up to the experience of the full divine influx of goodness. So we get it through these broken vessels, as the rabbis say, the shattered vessels, where everything isn't conveyed to us. The fullness of God's vision isn't conveyed to us clearly. Just like that Elvis TV that I said when I was in Graceland. Elvis shot his TV one night, probably drunk and stoned, and he didn't like what he heard on the TV, and he shot it with the gun that he had beside him. And then I went there to Graceland and stood in front of that TV and took a photo of myself in the television. And so, like I was saying yesterday, it's shattered. If you don't know me very well, you couldn't quite tell it was me. If you knew me well, you would be, oh, that's Craig, but it's still unclear. That's what this world is. That's what the rabbis say, the Kabbalists, that we're in a world of shattered vessels. Goodness is being conveyed to us all the time, but the shattered vessel within you doesn't let you see it clearly. Can you put that picture up, Joe? Oh, looky there. That's a picture I took in Graceland of Elvis's TV that he shot with his gun. I wonder if anyone was with him, or like maybe his wife was upstairs. Oh, that would be terrible. What a dark thought. She would have thought something else was happening. Yeah. But there's my image in the shattered television. It's often talked about the divine logos in Christ being the mirror of God, the reflection of the divine Father. We, in this life, we're looking at a reflection of the divine. We are seeing it shattered. What Jesus did was restored the divine image. See, I can't see myself correctly in that picture. We don't see ourselves correctly. That's why we get depressed. That's why we have self-hatred. And that's why we take that depression and self-hatred and project it on other people. But Christ lived exactly in the divine image. And if you look at it, don't look at the shattered vessel, but look at the television, the mirror that has not been shot. That's why when Thomas Aquinas had his experience, and that made him say the whole Summa Theologica, which we're studying right now, the whole Summa Theologiae is straw. What was he doing when that happened? He was staring at a crucifix. And it clicked what this world is and what self-giving, orgasmic, pain, blissful pain is, handing yourself all over to another in such fullness that it creates a new person, a new life. It clicked, and he was able to see it. The mystics talk about that. They walk out of the room, and now they're in Narnia. That's a poor example for what's really happening, but I have to use some kind of, as St. Paul said, I speak as a man. I have to use some kind of images to convey to you guys what's being said here. They now walk into a whole new world. They walk into a redeemed, resurrected, restored world. And you're not going to be able to see it from the outside. They're just going to look like Thomas is just going to look like Thomas, back at the desk, back at his table at the monastery, drinking his coffee and eating his biscuits. But he is now seeing everything different. So what the good does is it draws you, or what I wrote in my notes is, goodness turns you into itself. Goodness turns you into itself. The more you engage with the good, the gooder you'll become. The less you engage with the good, the more corrupted and shattered will you become. Engaging this straw here is engaging the good and adequating your mind to the truths of God so that you meditate on the world differently. You meditate on the forms. You don't just blindly walk through the world with a dog and a cat and a horse and a snowflake and just with your mind only occupied in your next video game or what you have to do at work or why did my wife say that to me. You're now occupied in how are these forms existing and morphing like they are. You begin to see the divine hand moving everything around you. And you can dance, finally. Okay, so I also want to connect, and this was done by a guy, a YouTube channel called Wake Up with Summa. He very brilliantly connected the useful, the virtuous, and the pleasant with faith, hope, and love. But he didn't connect which ones with which. And I had to sit there and think about it this morning at 17 degrees, standing outside with my pipe, trying to figure out. I usually don't smoke that early in the morning, but I was trying to figure this stuff out. It was difficult. I'm going to connect hope with useful, faith with virtuous, and love with pleasant. Oh, and I want to tell you the problem just real quick. When we say virtuous, I was saying that something is virtuous. The butterfly itself, it's good in itself. See, you have to use the word good. That's the problem I'm saying. When you describe virtuous, you almost have to say good. When they talk about virtue inside of a person, they say it's a good habit or a habit towards the good. You have to use the word good to describe virtue. And then he's using the word virtue to talk about good. That's why I was saying it's a problem philosophically. When you talk about the word good, you almost certainly have to, in some way, use the term good to describe what good is, because it's a bedrock experience that we all just have. Some things are good, some things feel good, some things aren't good, some things don't feel good. I cannot explain to a beaver why Shakespeare is good. You have to have the capacity to get it. So something is useful, like the chrysalis, it's moving towards its final goal to be the butterfly. So that chrysalis is useful, but that movement is stretching it towards the butterfly. The virtuous, you have to believe. That's why I'm uniting it with faith. That caterpillar has to believe that being the butterfly is good. Caterpillars don't really believe. I'm using this as a metaphor, people, to try to explain to you. You have to believe that working for your family is good, or else you're not going to get up every morning and go to work. You have to believe that something is good. And then once you experience it, once the butterfly's flapping around, or once I'm drinking my coffee, or once you're there with your family in the new vehicle that your hard work bought for them, and they're all rejoicing, now you're feeling the pleasure of that work. So all of these things, faith, hope, and love, are like Russian dolls inside of usefulness, virtue, and pleasure. And it's all good. It's trying to elevate your heart and mind up to that which is good ultimately. And that is that which we commonly refer to as God. As the rabbi said, God created us to give to us pleasure, to hand over or to share pleasure with us. All right, I've already gone too far. These I guess are just, fortunately we have the end of a page, so we might even be able to get out of here at the proper place. But I did want to read something just super quick from this morning's vigil office from St. Augustine. He says, suppose you, and he's going to use the word container, just like the Kabbalists use. Everything is about a container and then what enters into it. Everything's about the male-female aspect as you're making the divine ascent up this mountain towards that thing which is commonly referred to as God. Augustine says, suppose you are going to fill some holder or container, and you know you will be given a large amount. Then you set about stretching your sack or wineskin or whatever it is. Why? Because you know the quantity you will have to put in it, and your eyes tell you there's not enough room. By stretching it, therefore, you increase the capacity of the sack and the container, and this is how God deals with us. Simply by making us wait, he increases our desire, which in turn enlarges the capacity of our soul, making it able to receive what is being given to us. That's what this whole world is about. That we might cooperate with him to increase or to build the puzzle, and that determines the quality or the amount that of the divine influx you receive in the other world. And I'll just contrast all this with the opposite reality, which is someone losing usefulness, virtue, and pleasure, losing faith, hope, and love. They stop believing that the butterfly is virtuous, that it's good. That's what happens slowly and by degrees to someone who, God forbid, commits suicide. They are tricked by the devil into slowly, by degrees, losing sight of the virtue. And they no longer see a reason to get up in the morning. The coffee doesn't taste good anymore. They don't think they can help their family. They see no reason. Therefore, they lose faith. And in losing faith, they lose hope. And in losing hope, They no longer experience the pleasure, and it all collapses into darkness. God forbid, and may that never happen to any of us. And the way that you can make it not happen to you is to meditate, as we've said, upon these things of God, as Thomas did, so that your life may increase more and more in pleasure. Reply to objection 1. Goodness, as far as is identical with being, is divided into the 10 predicaments or categories, but this division belongs to it according to its proper formality. Thomas is just telling Larry, we're not talking about the being part, we're talking about the goodness part, and goodness is not divided that way. Goodness is divided in the ways that we're talking about here of rest, virtue, pleasure, and usefulness. Reply to objection 2. This division is not by opposite things, but by opposite aspects. Now these things are called pleasing, which have no other formality under which they are desirable except the pleasant, being something hurtful and contrary to virtue. Whereas the useful applies to such as having nothing desirable in themselves, but are desired only as helpful to something further, as taking of bitter medicine, while the virtuous is predicated of such as are desired in themselves. Some things we do that are not pleasant, but they're for a good end, like taking bitter medicine, but it's all moving towards a good end, which ends up being pleasurable, which is health or virtue or whatever. Reply to objection 3. Goodness is not divided into these 3 as something univocal, as the same thing, to be predicated equally of them all, but as something analogical. Remember, he's always going to go back to this. That's why he said in that first question, talking about things being metaphors. He's going to say we're talking about it analogically, to be predicated of them according to a priority and posteriority, the first and the end, or the beginning and the end. Hence it is predicated chiefly of the virtues, then of the pleasant, and lastly of the useful. Hence it is predicated chiefly of the virtues. The virtue is the thing that the butterfly we have to believe is good in of itself, and it's pleasant, that draws us towards it, and the line by which we're drawn is that which is useful, like the chrysalis, leading us all to the thing that is pleasant, which should lead us to a greater experience of the good, which should raise our mind to the ultimate good of where this all came from, where all this goodness came from, that we might thank him and praise him and enter into communion and relationship with him. That's the goal of all this. All right, 2 minutes over, Joe.
Yep, that's true.
There was some good stuff in there, dude.
Not
there
bad.
Was some good stuff in there.
Not bad. Pretty good.
There was some good stuff in there. Tomorrow we're going to a new question, I think. The goodness of God. Question 6. Whole new question. Everything's going to be all different and sunny tomorrow. Joe, I bid you a farewell and a beautiful day, and give my love to your parents. Goodbye, everybody. See you tomorrow.